Yeah. Works.
Okay, great.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. As Chuck said, I am Emanuele Bianco. I'm an Associate Program Officer in IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. And IRENA is an international organization that aims to assess, to analyze everything around renewable energy. But we don't do only that. We don't focus only on the energy sector. We try to push our boundaries outside the energy sector to understand the effects of renewable energy in the world, in the agriculture, in jobs, in everything. And so I'll start this presentation talking about the socioeconomic effects presently done by renewable energy. And our annual renewable energy and employment report assess the number of people working in the renewable energy sector and the growth over the years. And we see that from 2012 to 2017, 3 million people joined the renewable energy working sector, mostly in the solar PV industry. And we can see, however, that these new jobs are not evenly spread around the world. Most of the workers are in China, in particular for the manufacturing of solar PV, and then in Brazil for the manufacturing of bioliquids, the production of bioliquids in the EU and in the United States of America. At the same time, we have to say that there has been a job loss in the fossil fuel sector. However, it should be noted that this job loss is not due only for the startup of renewable energy in the world, but mostly because of new market dynamics, decreased cost of oil and gas, and better mining techniques for coal, and all these effects created the job loss in the fossil fuel sector. But we have also to check another thing about renewable energy jobs. Where are these jobs from a human resource perspective? So to deliver a power plant, we necessitate a number of person days. And we may have the impression that most of it is in the manufacturing, but actually, accordingly to our analysis, of about 230,000 person days to deliver a 50 megawatt solar PV power plant, most of it is in the installation and the operation and maintenance. And the same goes for an onshore wind farm, even if it needs a little less of person days. And this means that most of these jobs are in the location where the power plant is produced. And so putting on a wind or solar PV power plant will produce value in the country where it is developed. It's a little different for offshore wind farm because the manufacturing part takes most of the very large number of person days needed. Another way to understand the effects of solar and wind power plant is to check on what actually form a power plant. So we see that to do a 1 megawatt solar PV plant, we need 70 tons of glass, 56 tons of steel, 47 of concrete, and so on and so forth. And for an onshore wind farm, we actually need a very large amount of concrete for the foundations, 22.8 gigatons, and megatons, sorry, and so on and so forth. Looking at this, we can see that a policymaker can improve the value, can foster more value from the renewable energy power plant development by an accurate local content requirements or industrial policies. We saw that in Denmark. We saw that in Morocco, in South Africa, where the industry was adapted to meet the needs of viable renewable energy power plants, increasing the value of this plant for the local economy. And this is about the present. But if we want to check about the future, as was already said many times today, we need models to understand what will happen. So we developed a model that, as an input, have energy transition roadmaps. So what the world will be in the future. And the socioeconomic framework. We have under the basically what are the economies around the world, what are the jobs and the wealth and the state of the welfare. We put together everything in our energy, economic, environmental model, and we try to assess in this, from this model the effects of energy transition in terms of GDP, employment, and welfare. So this slide was already presented today. It compares two different cases. The reference case is the situation with policies as they stand now. Even considering the NDCs, the emission of CO2 because of the energy production will remain flat across the years. We will still have 35 gigatons a year of CO2 equivalent emission from the energy sector. The REMAP case, that is a case developed by IRENA, trying to understand the best technological option to meet the 2 degrees target. Try to see what will happen, what needs to happen in order to have 9.7 gigatons a year by 2050. And as you can see, I hope, most of the decarbonization needs to happen in the power and in the transport sector, two sectors that are dependent on a high density energy, cheap fuels. And energy efficiency also has a very big role. Around 40% of the carbon emissions will be reduced by energy efficiency. So we compare these two cases, I said, and we try to see what is the difference in terms of economic growth, for example. Here we see, in fact, the percentage difference in GDP terms between the reference case, as you can see in the 0, and the REMAP case. So what we can see in this figure is that thanks to new investment, and thanks also for the indirect effects that the energy transition will have, the world will actually experience a quicker economic growth of around 1%. And while at the beginning, the investment, the new investment will push the economic growth, after that, the indirect effects will maintain high the global economic growth. But we can also try to see what will happen regional specifically. And some countries, in particular South Africa, all of Europe, and in general, those countries that are a net importer of fossil fuel will see an increase in their GDP. While those countries that are dependent on their export of fossil fuels may see a decrease in their wealth. There in red and yellow, I put the Southern Europe, where also Cyprus is present, and we foresee an increase in GDP with the energy transition of around 2% higher than the reference case, than the policies as usual. And we can also try to assess the dynamic of this growth, and it's basically a stable growth over the years. And the reason of this growth is mainly due to indirect and induced effects. Southern Europe is a region with a consumer-focused economy with very strong local supply chains. So while the investment, those in blue, will remain stable across the period, this will foster growth and will increase the wealth via the indirect and induced effect. So I mentioned the jobs of today. 10.3 million people are working in the renewable energy, and maybe the y-axis is already giving a spoiler. In the future, we see that 18 million more people in 2050 will be working in the renewable energy fields, mostly in the bioenergy, because bioenergy is used also in the heating and in the transport sector, and in the solar industry. And at the same time, 7-8 million people, 7-8 million jobs will be lost in the fossil fuel sector. However, if we compare these numbers, we can say that 11 million jobs will be created by the energy transition. And this is only the direct jobs, because as I said before, we have also to consider the indirect effects of the energy transition. And if we see the difference in employment across the globe with the energy transition, accordingly to our model, we are going to have more opportunities for the people. In particular, in Europe, in particular for Southern Europe, where the employment level will be increased by 1% compared to the reference case. Again, the growth will be basically stable across the year. And again, this is mainly because of a change in the local supply chain, not being any more focused on the fossil fuels. The jobs will be shifted in the renewable energy sector that will foster growth and in other sectors, for example, cement, just to say one. So I want to conclude by saying another very important statement for me. The energy transition makes economic sense. We are going to, if we are going to go to this path, we are going to invest quite an amount of money, 1.7 trillion per year of US dollars. But at the same time, we are going to foster so many benefits that they will outweigh the cost by a factor between 2 and 5. And these benefits are not only in the energy sector or in the economic sector, but also in the in terms of annual health, reduced externalities, better air, and so on and so forth. So this is all I have, and thank you.
All right, thanks, Emanuele. Any questions for Emanuele? Very encouraging in terms of the job opportunity. Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Very informative. We know that IRENA is doing some work, special work on islands. Yes. Where the islands, it has been shown from previous studies that I have seen, they can be early beneficiaries of all these investments, especially in the renewables and CSP plants, etc. Can you brief us a little bit what are the plans in the next work program of IRENA about islands initiative?
So unfortunately, this is not my work, my daily work in the SEEDS initiative. However, yes, IRENA started focusing in particular on the small island because they are perfect laboratories for the energy transition. They have a small amount of energy need, and with little additional investment, you can already start to enjoy the energy transition earlier. The work will continue. I know that the workshops are going to be again in the Caribbean island, Vanuatu, and so on and so forth. So it's not something that is already solved in the next few months.
Yes.
Yes. Since you're an economist, perhaps you can help us with what I think is the major difficulty here. And is we live in this society where market and short-term concerns are completely dominant. The only consideration really that drives things. Mm-hmm. And we need to start thinking long-term with a different view on the market. So how are we going to make this transition between short-term thinking to long-term economic thinking?
So just to make a little correction, I'm an energy engineer.
Okay, I thought.
But anyway, no, but that is actually very true because variable renewable energy in particular is very capital intensive, meaning that you have to make a long-term investment for your future. And while everything, in particular in the power sector, is driven by short-term prices. If I don't have a feed-in tariff, a feed-in premium to help me continue to help me to understand the market, to understand the return that I will have, short-term energy prices are not a good signal for variable renewable energy developers. That's why I think, and everything is going in that direction so far, the short-term energy prices will be dismissed over time in favor of auctions and long-term financial instrument to provide stability to this kind of power plant. However, that will need a very strong political push. We have seen the shrinkage of volumes of dispatchable generators over time, but this is actually creating more barriers for the reform of the wholesale energy markets. So we will need a strong political push to make the markets looking at the long term instead of looking only in an hourly 50 minutes gate closure time.
Yes.
Use it. Yeah, it's okay. It's working. What about the volatility of the industries in this sector? We have been looking the PV industry growing in Europe, then being affected by the change of the worldwide investments in that, and it disappeared. We have been talking about the CSP industry in Europe again with the Desert Tech project in North Africa. Then this project stopped and the CSP industry didn't come out. Again in Saudi Arabia and so on. So are you considering this kind of, let's say, global flow of investments and volatility of industries in the scenario you are describing?
No, that is not something that is addressed. This is a scenario that just check what is the best technological option. Then we enter as official policy analysts, and we try to give to policymakers exactly that message.
Yeah, but when you evaluate the number of jobs that are created in South Europe, for example, which kind of jobs are they? Are they in managing the plants, or are they in manufacturing the technologies, or in somewhere in services? Because this is, I think, the big problem we have in convincing politicians and investors to make something there.
So in the blue, is this no? This is GDP. Okay. So in blue, you can see the effects in jobs directly done by the investment in renewable energy or energy efficiency. So the people actually building plants or maintaining them or dismissing them. The yellow area instead is the number of jobs, the percentage difference in jobs in created in other industries. So, for example, in the cement industries or in the tourist industry. So that's how we evaluate. The amount of jobs created directly by the manufacturing, etc., is very low. It's not that what we try to assess, to say, sorry.
Emanuele, could you go back to slide 8?
8.
Okay. I guess one thing I'd like to point out is when sectors are divided this way, it combines energy suppliers and energy consumers on the same graph. And so the big wedge there is power. But that's not a consumer. Buildings and industry and transport are consumers.
Yeah.
So if you look at where that power goes,
it goes in power.
Most of it goes into buildings. Yeah. Okay. And so if you actually plotted out end consumption, buildings would be the biggest wedge up there, and even the district heating goes to buildings.
Yes.
So I think when it's plotted this way, people don't understand that if you make buildings more efficient, you actually reduce other sectors, not just the building sector.
Yes, of course, of course. I am not sure about all the rationalities behind this, but however, the decarbonization of the power sector, the generation of power, of the generation of heating is still
That's true.
very important.
And then I have a question, and that is that just as there are climate deniers, a lot of those people also attack renewable energy. And so when you make the point about job creation, there's two things that they come back with. One, they say compared to the fossil fuel industry, people in the solar and wind industry don't make as much money. They're lower salaries. That's one argument they make. The other argument they make is in the fossil fuel industry, you quickly build the plant and then people have jobs associated with the supply of fuel. Whereas in solar and wind, it's all capital up front. Once that's done, there's no more jobs. So how do you respond to those arguments against renewable energy jobs?
So the very first is that power plant, while it's true, we don't need to supply any kind of fuels, except maybe for biomass, which in fact creates some jobs. Sure. Still, you need to operate them. Still, you need to work on them, to maintain them. A wind farm cannot be left alone, not doing anything.
But the number of employees is much smaller than at a coal plant, for example.
Not accordingly to what is happening across the world, because one coal mine can supply several coal plants, and the number of jobs will not be higher to the creation of new coal plants immediately, for example. And instead, we need so many new power plants that we are going to guarantee jobs for the next 20, 40, 50 years. So
it's not a near-term problem, is what you're saying.
Sorry?
It's not a near-term problem. It's because it's going to take a long while to build
Absolutely.
out renewables. Right.
Well, we need much more renewable energy than fossil fuels.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see. Yes, and go ahead. Yeah.
CSP plants require 60 people permanently during the whole lifespan of the plant. So in this regard, CSP plants are exactly the same like a coal plant in terms of people working in the plant forever.
Okay.
As you invest in the assets and you have 40 to 50 people involved for 30 years of lifespan of the plant without any problem. So that makes a difference to wind and PV.
Okay, good point. Thank you. All right, well, I think, Emanuele, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Thanks, everybody. Let's thank all the speakers again.